Hello beautiful people and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the classes that I took during my second semester at NYU. If you watched my last video, you probably know that I didn't have the most positive experience when it came to my academics during my first semester at NYU. But I can gladly say that spring semester was completely different. Other than the shift to online learning during the middle of the semester, thank you coronavirus, my academics experience spring semester was amazing. Again, if you didn't watch my last video, just some background, I am a student at the College of Arts and Sciences at New York University majoring in politics, and I went into NYU as a freshman, but at the moment I'm a sophomore slash almost junior. And before I go on to the classes that I took during my spring semester, make sure to subscribe to my channel. There's a little button somewhere in these corners so that you can do so you don't miss any of my videos. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the classes that I took during the spring semester. So during my spring semester, I took 16 credits. At NYU, classes are typically 4 credits, so that came out to 4 classes again, so a normal course load. This time, however, I took 1 core class, 2 classes for my major, and 1 elective, which is technically also for my major, but I'll explain later on. For each of these classes, I'll include a brief description of what the class is like on paper. My first class was Core UA 400 Text and Ideas, The Arts of Noticing. So this course fulfilled my text and ideas requirement, which I'll insert a description of what that is somewhere here. This class met twice a week for lecture, which was 75 minutes each, and once a week for recitation, also 75 minutes. And recitation is basically like a discussion group slash review session where you have less people. For example, the lecture for this class was like 150 people, and my recitation was about 15 people. And for this specific class, the recitation was very discussion based. We were just discussing texts that we had looked at during the week in lecture and seeing if any different ideas came up, etc. And in terms of assignment for this class had 20% of the grade came from attendance and participation, which included reading reflections approximately every other week. There was a midterm, which was 15% of the grade. There was a final, which was 25% of the grade. There was a paper, which was 15%, and a final paper, which was 25%. And I would say the workload for this class was pretty light slash average. Weekly reading wasn't too heavy. It was 100 pages or less every week. And I personally found the reading very interesting and very engaging. Bi-weekly, there was a 1-page reflection. The finals and the midterm weren't super easy, but they weren't extremely difficult. Papers were also pretty doable. They were 5 pages each on a text that we had read, and I think the questions were interesting. In terms of assignment for this class, I didn't think it was too much. Now, I absolutely loved this class. And I was a little scared because the text and ideas requirement is notorious for being one of the worst in the core. But I personally love literature, and so I was excited to have a class which was more creative and more literature based, because my classes for politics tend to be very analytical. And I really enjoyed this class. I loved the material. Text and ideas are broadly literature classes with a particular emphasis or theme. And so this class was called The Arts of Noticing, and essentially the course was about how art, so literature, painting, music, film, can help us notice the minutiae of everyday life and find beauty in the ordinary. And I don't know, I was really inspired by the course. Every week the reading was interesting. For me, it was a really enjoyable course. So we read novels, poetry, nonfiction, we watched film. There was a lot of French literature in the course, which I really liked. So overall, I really liked this class, and I would definitely take it again. My professor, Hannah Friedthal, was also extremely interesting. I would write down like word per word of what she said in lecture, because even just like her way of speaking was so poetic and so beautiful. Now, the next class that I took was Pol UA 100 Political Theory. This class is part of the core for the politics program. I think this class tends to change slightly from semester to semester, like depending on who is teaching it. But when I took it, it was mostly centered on Western social contract theory, and the course covered pretty much everything from Hobbes' Leviathan to Rawls' Theory of Justice. Now, this class also met 2 times a week for 75-minute lectures and once a week for 75-minute long recitation. And the assignment for this class changed pre and post coronavirus. So under normal circumstances, the assignments were reading response papers for 20% every week, a paper for 20% of the grade, a midterm for 20%, final, which was 30%, and attendance and participation for 10%. However, after Corona, grading changed slightly, so reading and participation were 20%, the paper was worth 30%, and the final was worth 40%, and attendance and participation was still 10%. There was also the option to do an optional paper, which would have weighed 20% instead of having a paper be 30 and the final be 40. However, I chose not to do the optional paper since I was doing quite well in the course, so I kind of took the gamble and had my final weigh for 40%. The workload for this class, I would say it was average, leaning on the heavier side. Because it was political theory, there was a lot of reading, and the reading was very dense, especially many of the earlier readings like Hobbes and Rousseau was pretty heavy. Like Leviathan is, I don't have it with me here, but it's a thick book. And the response papers were not too difficult to write, but there was one every week, and the questions were a little abstract, so you had to think about it. It wasn't that you could just summarize the text. And papers, the papers were more on the difficult side. The final was pretty fair. Overall, I would say average to heavy on the workload. In terms of my thought for the class, I really enjoyed it. This was kind of like the class that I was looking forward to the most in my study of political science, and I really enjoyed the class. I loved the professor, loved the content. I wish I could take it again, or I wish that I could take a different political theory class, because I loved. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like as a political science major, this is kind of the cornerstone of your study, and I just feel really lucky that I had such a positive experience with this class, because I know that at some other colleges, political theory is kind of a more boring class. I really enjoyed the class, and I feel like I learned so much. Even now when I'm thinking about things that I see in politics every day, I think about some of the theories and concepts that we looked at in this class. So yeah, it was really interesting, and probably going to think about it for a long time. My next class was Pol UA 130, Ethics, Politics, and Public Policy. This class was also for politics, but it counted as an elective. And this class went twice a week for 75-minute long lectures, and there was kind of a discussion element at the end, but no recitation, which is one of the reasons why I chose it. In terms of the assignment, the original syllabus for this class had participation for 10%, a midterm which was worth 15%, a second midterm which was worth 20%, a paper which was worth 25%, and a final paper which was 20%. And after coronavirus, the syllabus was readjusted, so participation was now worth 30% of the final grade. The midterm was still worth 15%, and we didn't have a second midterm, so the paper was worth 25%, and the final paper was worth 30%. I would say the workload for this class was on the heavier side. There was a lot of reading. I probably had to do more reading for this class than I did for my literature class, which was exclusively reading, and for political theory. In terms of the papers, they were pretty dense. The midterm that I did didn't go well, and yeah, it was intense. I don't know, it was like the class was just more on the heavier side, and I didn't know this when I signed up, but the class was mostly juniors and seniors, so I was kind of the youngest there and the least experienced, and so I didn't know what I was getting into. Which leads me into my thoughts on the class. I actually really enjoyed the class. I had kind of switched into this class after I didn't like one of my other classes, and I didn't know the class was going to be this good. Basically, half of the class was discussing theories from political science, and then half of the class was the policy part. So then the class came together really nicely because we would apply these theories from politics and ethics to issues of public policy, and I found it super interesting. I feel like I learned so much during this class. and it really changed the way that I thought about certain public policy issues, and it also made me aware of public policy issues that weren't necessarily things that I thought about every day, like squatters' rights, which was the topic of one of my papers. And yeah, overall I really enjoyed this class. Anyone who has a similar class, or if you're in NYU studying politics, I would highly recommend taking it. And the last class that I took during my spring semester was Econ UA1, Intro to Macroeconomics. Now this class was technically an elective, but this is one of the requirements for the politics honors track, which I'm hoping to do. I kind of took it as an elective, but also for the politics honors track. This class met twice a week for 75-minute lectures, and then once a week again for recitation, also 75 minutes. Originally, the assignments for this class were problem sets for 20% of the grade, and these were just practical problems related to the material. A midterm for 25%, a second midterm for 30%, and a final for 35%. After Corona, the teacher decided to no longer have the second midterm or the final, so the new weighing was the problem sets for 10%, the first midterm for 25%, and then each week we had a quiz, which he called a checkup. There were 6. The lowest grade was dropped, and they were each worth 5%. And 10% was also added to your highest grade. I would say the workload for this class was pretty average. For all of the people that had already taken econ in high school or intro to macro, this class was pretty easy, I've heard. I didn't take econ at all, so I was learning everything for the first time, and I found the workload pretty bearable. The midterm was on the harder side. The checkups were fine and they were open book. But yeah, I'm also not an econ major, so this wasn't like my area. And in terms of thoughts that I had about this class, I didn't have any strong like or dislike. I really enjoyed the professor. I actually really enjoyed the lectures. I thought this class was going to be a bit more of a drag because it's not something I'm particularly interested in. I still found the class enjoyable. I was learning everything for the first time, as I said, so I was kind of learning how to think in terms of economics. And there were obviously parts of the class that I enjoyed more, parts of the class that I enjoyed less. I think for political science, you have to have some basic grasp of the macroeconomy. So I felt like either way, if I didn't take this class, I wouldn't really be prepared to be a good political scientist. So yeah, those were the classes that I took during my spring semester at NYU. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and also to subscribe to my channel while you're at it. If you want to see this kind of video for the fall semester, maybe what classes I'm signed up for or what classes I took my fall semester of my technically junior year now, let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.